Hello, welcome to the 1960s Project. The 1960 Project brings you voices from the 1960s. We're making new connections in unexpected ways. On the 1960s Project, we've called on fellow friends and colleagues who were in high school in the 1960s to recall their high school years, reminisce about things in high school, but also to reflect on their lives and their meaning. Many of us who entered the labor market in 1960 with our first jobs, and we have seen work change. When we first started working, we didn't have computers. We didn't have word processors. We didn't even have the TI calculators. So the technologies of work have changed. The locations of work have changed. We've particularly seen recently with the COVID that many of us are working from home. Office life has changed. We went from closed offices to open space to working virtually. So we're going to use our experiences from the past, our work experience from the past, to think about what work will look like in the year 2025. Today's session is a continuation of our first session of our second season, where we had Robert Nielsen talk about what it meant to grow up to be a futurist, think about the future. We're going to draw on his experiences. The response to that was so positive that we are having a follow-up show today. Instead of talking about future scenario planning, Bob is going to take us through an exercise to write a futuristic scenario. I call futuristic scenarios memories of the future. We have memories of the past. We know what's happened. We can use scenario planning to develop stories that will guide us and also prepare us for the future. So when the future comes, we'll know what to do. So just like we have memories of the past, we also have memories of the future. My name is Jerome Page, and I'll be turning over the session to Robert Nielsen in just a couple minutes. He will be joined by James Page, Sharon Pugh, and Lewis Hicks. Each of them, along with Bob and myself, have blogs on the What's on Jerome's Mind page, and you can find out more about us and also watch our previous interviews on YouTube. So what I'm going to do is welcome Bob again. Bob, welcome. I'll stop sharing my screen to bring you up.
Thank you very much, Jerome.
Okay, so Bob, I'm going to turn it over to you now. It's all on you, my man.
Okay, well, I thank you very much for this opportunity, and we'll have some fun.
Okay.
So I'm going to start, since this is all about futuristic stories. I'll start with a little story from the past, and then I'll tell you the reason at the end why I'm starting this story. When Jerome and I were faculty members at the National Defense University, I was invited to give a presentation down in Huntsville, Alabama, with all of the rocket scientists down there at NASA. And so there were more PhDs per capita there, some really, really smart people. And I had one of the breakout sessions, and the main speaker was a gentleman by the name of Ben Zander. Ben Zander was conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra. And he was standing there with a piano, and there's about 300 people in the room, maybe more. And he really talked about the art of the possible. So he said, how many people in this room have birthdays today? And so many people raised their hand. And then he said, let's sing happy birthday to them. And he got up on the piano and he played, and everybody kind of went through the motions of singing Happy Birthday. So he said, that was not a good rendition. He said, at the end of this hour session, you will be standing on your chairs singing Ode to Joy in German, and it will sound good. So everybody pretty much was looking at each other and saying, what is this guy smoking? So he went through his presentation and talked about the art of the possible. And then he passed out these sheets. It was actually Ode to Joy, phonetically in German. And he had us standing on top of our seats singing, and he kind of taught us how to sing. And you know what? It sounded pretty good. So within an hour of just kind of pumping people up, talking about how you can change things very quickly. And so he got all of these rocket scientists, literally, changing their mindset and be able to go forward. So the reason for that is I'm going to challenge you folks. The charge to you folks are to come up with futuristic stories told by a date certain in the future, let's say 2025, and it will tell the story as if you are in that date, on that date. So like on July 26th, 2025, and then you put in the name of your protagonist, a real name, not, like the director of, strategic planning for X, Y, and Z organization. Put in a real name and then go on with your story. And the object here is to think about the things that you want in the workplace. If you were king or queen, what would you want post-pandemic to have the what the workplace would look like? And what I usually try to do if I'm writing these things, and I've done them for universities and led workshops for universities, the entire United States Army, Brookings Institution, high-tech firms, and so on and so forth, is I always try to identify ahead of time some of the macro level trends that are influencing what's happening today. So I know that I asked you a little bit of sweat equity to identify at least two articles that you have come up with to say, well, what are some of those trends? So I'm going to ask you in a couple of minutes to say, what are those trends? We'll do, we'll kind of do a little tribute to Alex Trebek and say, we'll do the lightning round here to come up with three things each. Okay.
Okay.
But here, for example, from my neophytic perspective on certain things is, commercial real estate is just not going to hack it anymore. I think this notion of working remotely and working in virtual teams is going to be something that's going to continue. Maybe not to the degree it is now, but it's going to continue. The whole notion of public transport may change. People getting on subways. And if you just kind of, peel that back, it's kind of like the atomization of everything. You are down to units of one. Mm-hmm. And that, you may be as an employee, an independent actor, and that, so that you are the one atom, and then you are in nodes or networks of people, of skilled people who have a specific task. I think hopefully, and I will probably write this in there, the notion of how you get paid. Right now, in many cases, it's an industrial age artifact. It's the notion that you put in 80 hours every 2 weeks and you get paid at an hourly rate. Does it really say that you did anything or produced anything? Who knows? You don't know.
Right.
So in other words, how, pay mechanisms, compensation mechanisms, would most folks want to get paid for their intellectual capital, their ideas, vice, an hourly rate. And, you can look to salespeople, when people start out in sales, they may give you some sort of stipend, but then, later on, you go on totally on commission. So, your performance is based on what you bring in or whatever else. So, or the Hollywood movie system, more and more of the Hollywood stars, when they were making movies, got paid with X amount of percent of the gate, of the movie gate, or, any other digital media. They may have gotten a little bit upfront, but they take the they can make more money by taking a percentage, and so on and so forth. So those are some of just a couple from my perspective, and I have a whole list upstairs that I forgot to bring downstairs. But I mean, those are the ones that I've identified now that I think are going to influence things. So
let's bring up the other guests, because I have some. I want to comment on some of yours.
Sure.
James Page, you want to join? We can bring him up, and Sharon Pugh, and also hi Sharon, and also Lewis Hicks. My short-term memory challenging at times. So Bob, I listened to your trends there about the change in work and the change in pay and the change in compensation, and I'll jump ahead as one of the articles that I pulled up and I was thinking about is the evolution of the app economy or the platform economy. In 2025, where is that going to go? Well, one of the things that came to mind when you were talking about compensation and location of work is one of the things that's changing now is also who bears the risk.
You're right.
So as workers become deinstitutionalized, that meaning that they are no longer tied to a structure, if we're all working on commission, then who bears the risk of unemployment? Who bears the risk of securing for future retirement?
Right.
Who bears the risk for the changes in the economy? If they're all going to be, if everything is going to be atomized, then what happens when risk is atomized?
Good point. I don't want to respond right now. I want to hear from the other folks.
Okay. All right. So Sharon, your voice turn up.
Okay, now I'm off. Okay.
Yeah. Were you able to, did you get a chance to select a couple articles that would guide you in thinking about constructing a scenario?
Well, I didn't complete my homework assignment. I only got one article instead of two.
Okay.
But it was reflecting on basically compensation and how it reflected on a couple of things, both in the past, where in lieu of money, there was like a barter system. There was more an exchange. We had a different value system. So it wasn't necessarily a transfer of monetary capital units, but there could have been goods, there could have been a trade in services, in-kind contributions, if you will, and that there's a question as to whether or not we may go back to that to some extent as the economic impact kind of implodes our system. And so many people have insecure finances and employment and healthcare and the whole bit. I thought that was interesting. There's a comment, I want to make a comment on something Bob said. He referred to, where was it? There it is. You referred to intellectual capital versus human capital.
Mm-hmm.
And I take that to be a change in, it's one of the changes I think that's coming about because of technology.
Right.
That because we are becoming more of a service-oriented, information-based, or whatever other adjectives you want to put on it, society, that manual labor, actual labor, which I associate with the work effort, the physical effort, will no longer be as important, partially also because of automation and everything.
Right.
But I find it interesting to focus on the intellectual capital versus the human capital, which is typically what people talk about in employment and work.
Go ahead, Sharon. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, that's all I have. Go ahead.
Well,
Good.
wouldn't you have to add another layer? Because there are the people in the service industry, or what we have euphemistically called the essential workers. So they're the essential people who have to get up, they have to interact with the public, they have to drive the buses, drive the trains, pick the fruits. That seems to be a different type of work or labor.
Well, you're going to have that with the, like, that's what I'm saying, with the advances in technology, where you have automated, intelligent transportation systems. Bob was talking about commuter systems. There's an envisioning of where you don't need a driver anymore. We will reduce those kinds of workforces because of technology, that we will have transport systems where you can get on a train in Atlanta or a bus. You can fly from Atlanta. I'm just thinking Atlanta. If you live in Atlanta, leave your home, get on public transportation, and go all the way to Boston on a seamless fare payment system that involves no human interaction at all. And that's what there are always some efforts that will require human interaction,
Okay.
particularly in the social services.
Right.
But I think some of these other things in social services, yes, in providing whoever is the background or behind the scenes in doing the automation, the programming, the retrofitting, or whatever of all the IT systems, that requires there's human input required in everything, but that requires human interaction, whether or not it's with people or with machinery. But I do think in terms of work, the human to human interaction, it will definitely be diminished.
James, you're in the social services. What articles did you select?
Well, I was looking at a scenario in terms of in the future, how does someone access supportive services? And I didn't find a lot in terms of trends for that, but I did find enough in the delivery of healthcare. So there's parallel. I mean, it's not direct. So I think that, part of it is that, engagement for under-resourced people has always been a challenge.
Let me stop you there. What do you mean by give us an example of supportive services.
Supportive services means that, if you can't pay your utilities, that you have somewhere to go to get payment relief. If you face an eviction, you have somewhere to go in order to secure housing. If you don't have enough food, that basically what we're really talking about is the safety net that is supposed to exist, but it goes back and forth.
Well, do you see the safety net changing in the future?
It has to.
Okay, and you don't have to give us the scenario now. As Bob says, we're just identifying. But part of your scenario would be how it's 2025. You're there, like Edward Bellamy looking backwards in his classic novel of 1888, to see how you get to 2025, June of 2025, exactly, in terms of what the safety net will look like.
Can I?
Yeah, but also, go ahead, Sharon.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I thought he was moving on. You finish.
No, but also it becomes a question of, it has to be done through technology. So how do you ensure that people who need that support have the technology available? Mm-hmm. That becomes and it's existing now. I mean, like I said, there's not a lot going on vis-a-vis the social services, but when you look at telehealth, telepsych, telemedicine, teletherapy, that they are moving in the direction, but of course they are appealing to a group of people where the assumption is that they have the available technology.
Okay.
So the question of, in sort of thinking about this, then that just becomes another layer.
Okay. Well, before we bring Sharon in, Gordon's posted a comment. He says Brookings Institution did a recent study. Brookings Institution is located here in Washington, D.C., better known as one of those liberal think tanks. Did a recent study where they expect a surge in robotics and automation.
Yep.
This is already happening, but economic downturns and cataclysmic events typically result in such a surge. We're seeing automation and robotics in the conventional industries, but also in the farm fields. The new paradigm, if you will, can create a split where highly skilled workers at the upper levels of industry or more sophisticated industries, while there may be a greater segmentation in the, and probably segmentation in the labor market, which one of the things that I, segmentation, okay. Yeah, so we can look at the book Brookings study. As I was thinking about it when I was in late 1960s, early 70s, there was a theory called the dual labor market theory. And you had in one part of the labor market, you had the highly skilled workers. And in another part of the labor market, you had the lower skilled workers. And that's when this economy was beginning to bifurcate. Sharon, you wanted to say something, then we'll bring Lewis in.
Well, I was just going to comment on something James mentioned about, the service delivery and the access to technology. I got a COVID appointment, my appointment for my vaccination for Thursday morning. Hey. I was able to get through, but it took persistence. I was on the damn computer for 3 solid hours, just redoing. I had my phone too, because they gave us a call number if you don't have a computer. But of course, the call number stayed busy, and you just punch redial. You finally get out of that little we're full or we're busy, and you get another script, and it asks you to identify what you want, and it said if you want an appointment, calling about an appointment, push this. I did that. It sent me back to the original one. So we got a lot. Technology is making advancements, but it's not keeping up with the mass needs.
Okay.
We're making advances on these big issues, but it's the kind of everyday situations that we've got to realize. We've got groceries being delivered. Maybe they'll even start delivering them by drones or whatever. But I was able to finally get my appointment. So the only thing I have to do physically is to go down there and get the appointment.
Are you going to go down there in a driverless car?
Of course not. I don't have a driverless car. And I don't trust driverless cars because there's still too many human drivers out there.
Let's get some comments from Lewis, and then Rob can pick up and actually start the instruction of how to. Lewis?
Yeah, I was mainly interested in government work and management and the future of work according to that. And then I found 2 articles, one by John Kaminsky and one that said, the first one was the future of work post-pandemic, we're not going back. And the other one was distant work arrangements, the workplace of the future is now. And one of the common things that they were talking about is something that was kind of alluded to earlier. What about those people that are, as Jerome calls them, essential workers? Because from one level, we always think about people working in offices, but not necessarily the people that are the farm workers or the people cleaning the streets, those things that you can't do by telework. So one of the points that they made was suddenly the conversations about telework has shifted from, do we have the right technologies in place? Do we have the right people, policies, and training in place, and that life will change, live and working remotely. And one of the things they were surprised by was how work is done in teams, and then also some of the things of managing your time, productivity, socialization, and also self-motivation, whether or not people are going to be motivated. Is there will be a deficit for people interacting in the office, say around the water cooler, and the problems of women in the workplace now that the work has shifted. I wrote some notes about that specific one. It was by Melinda Gates. I'm going to see if I can scroll to my notes.
Okay, before you
Mhm.
dig too deep in that, because you give us some teasers, so you're describing what's now. So before this is over, before we get through this, after Bob takes us through the how-to part, you'll give us a teaser as to what do you think it's going to be like in 2025. Is it going to be a water cooler based office or a non-water cooler based office, and what does that mean when you wake up and it's like Rip Van Winkle and it's June 30th, 2025? Bob, you want to take us through the
Sure.
how-to?
The how-to is that, starting is the worst. I would suggest, well, first of all of these articles that you mentioned, I don't know if you send them to Jerome, can you post them up there?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in other words, you have additional information that you may want to look at. I mean, the two I chose, and I'll get to the point in a minute, were 9 future work trends. It was a Gartner publication, and they're pretty good. They were pretty good. And then the other was a Fast Company article. And I gave Jerome links to both of them, so I won't go into detail. But and I wanted to respond back quickly to Sharon. If you go back and look at the Knowledge Navigator that Apple put out, you can get it on YouTube. They had, just go out to YouTube and put in Knowledge Navigator by Apple. It was done in 1986. And in 1986, they had an intelligent agent with an avatar doing those things that you were doing, trying to get an appointment to get vaccinated. Okay? That was 1986. So in other words, if you look forward and seeing what Apple did, it was huge back in 86 to be able to show that, and it'll kind of tweak your mind about what's the possible and or what is possible. Okay, enough of that. I'll get into nuts and bolts now. I sent you 2 copies of, or 2 examples of futuristic scenarios. One was in the knowledge management principles. It was the specialist Alfredo scenario. And it was, I think it was 3 or 4 acts. It was on, over a couple of days. And, you can name the acts, anything you want. And then, just to divide it up a little bit. And if you saw over in the columns there, I was trying to illustrate the specific principles associated with what I want the Chief of Staff of the Army and the Secretary of the Army to sign out. So that was one way of doing it. The article that was in Futurist magazine kind of showed it very nicely graphically to have, the key concepts, illustrated out in kind of sidebars with a little line going back and forth to it. I said, there was no separation of home and work. Okay. It was 24/7. It was, business was 24/7. And that was back in 2008. So
it's a Bob. So for people who are just seeing this for the first time,
right.
maybe you can briefly say, well, first of all, what is a future scenario and why is it important?
A future scenario it paints a vivid picture of a future state through the eyes of a protagonist at a date certain in the future. So in other words, it's as if you were in that time frame X amount of years into the future. And then what you try to illustrate in it is all of the things that are in essence affecting the organization, or it could even be an individual. It could be you, to write one to say, where do you want to be at that particular point in time, and have different dimensions of it.
You often refer to them as stories. Why do you refer to them as stories?
Because why stories? People identify with stories. They don't identify with abstract strategic plans. Cognitively, human beings are wired for stories. So therefore, you remember stories. So, I mean, the old jokes, there was always three things in a joke, the priest, the minister, and the rabbi, then you went on and you talked about it. Okay. And then, but you remember what your old, Uncle Sam did at the Thanksgiving table 25 years ago. You remember the stories of what your grandparents told you about the Depression or whatever else and how they saved. I can remember stories of, my dad was an engineer, and talking about my grandfather, he ordered a case of stovepipe, a gross, and he didn't know what a gross was. So they had stovepipe all over the place, they had 144, pieces of stovepipe. What the hell do you do with 144 pieces of stovepipe in the metal business? It was just overkill. So I remember silly things like that. The point that I'm trying to bring up is you're cognitively wired for stories. So what does that do? It creates a rallying point of where the organization is going. And if you have multiple stories from multiple people at the organization, you vet them, you can come up with a pessimistic case, an optimistic case. You can actually do a composite one. I like the notion of beg, borrowing, and stealing from all of the different stories that are told. And then you go back and modify yours. And then the key thing is, from that futuristic story, you look at what do we have to change from a technology perspective? What do we have to change from an organizational culture perspective? The way we do things around here, the Edgar Schein notion. What do we have to change from a process perspective? And so on and so forth. And we will do that with the stories that you folks come up with. And then when you have all of those different things and interventions, then you develop the action plan that puts it into place.
So Bob, let me stop you there. So
Sure.
How do I begin? So let's say I'm really excited about this. So what's the first step? So what should I do? Should I be old school and take out a pencil and paper, or should I open up my laptop, or do it on my iPhone?
I try to jot down, like we were doing before, what are all macro level trends that I'm really trying to address. Mm-hmm. And I have more upstairs. I just goofed and didn't take the pad down with me. But, things are going to a touchless society. You're going to have, artificial intelligence and machine learning that's going to be, involved in it from a technological perspective. All of those kinds of things are coming into vogue right now. And you mentioned robotics. You even got Roombas running around your house.
Yeah, well, I think about robotics, and we were talking about essential workers. I read a story about Walmart, and they were using robotics to clean the stores while the customers. It became so eerie that they had to stop. They had to put people back on the floor. But that's an aside. So let's assume in my case, I guess I'm fortunate. I'm a parent trying to educate my kid. So I'm sitting down, pulling my hair out and saying, where is this all headed? How would I begin to, what questions would I ask myself, and what steps would I go through to kind of clear my head to see where we're going to end up at June 30th, 2025?
Well, I would look at macro level trends, like in the education space. Let's say if you have a high school kid, okay, you see that there's going to be remote learning. There's going to be hybrid models of the notion of in class participation as well as remote class. Look at what's happening at the university level. There are books out there called The End of College. Who the heck can afford a 4-year education at a top line university that doesn't have, an endowment, larger than some small countries? Okay. They can get scholarships. So the notion also, think about K through 12 education. That's an industrial age artifact. If you go through lockstep on a conveyor belt, if you can meet certain performance standards in the education realm, why can't you do high school in a much, much faster way? All of these things, if you talk about you're educating, you can write about it of how that would actually work X amount of years from now.
Okay.
So you can envision it, and you
Okay.
can tell the stories through the eyes of what? A student and a parent. And then, how they're going to, let's say, try to get into a college at age 16 or with advanced credit, whether it be the community college system, whether it be some other means that we don't know of that you can envision, just go ahead and do it. And here's the key thing. Try to eliminate constraints in your mind. In other words, if it's, get out the notion that, no, we never can afford this. When Kennedy said we're going to put a man, going back into your grounding in the 60s, Jerome, when Kennedy said we're going to put a man on the moon in X amount of years, he wasn't talking about, how much it's going to cost. He had the vision out there. So, get those notions out of your head and then, take a giant leap forward. And then you can always scale back. You can always see what's, realistically we can do towards that end state that you describe in vivid detail.
So here I am, lots of stuff coming at me. And you want me to step back and think about 2025?
Exactly.
Aren't you asking a bit much?
No. I want you to think about 2025. And then, but basically, you're going to be grounded in, some of the influences that you had, let's say, back in the 60s, of course. But I mean, I think the key thing is you need to get out of your own experience or whatever else, and then try to get into a new frame of reference. And if you, start talking to young people now, I mean, I got a couple of grandchildren, and if they have a phone or any sort of electronic device in their hand, I mean, they just zip through it. I mean, it's a whole different ballgame of how they operate, or, even all of the video games and whatever else. It's just huge. But the
so step one is to just pause, assess what's going on around me in terms of influences. You use the word trends or what's happening, looking into news, reading what's coming in, and then begin to say, okay, one thing is where is it headed?
Right.
Another question is where would I like for it to be headed?
I think you can do either one.
Okay.
That's the whole point. You can do either one. I mean, you can look at macro level trends and the chances, the chances are that you would have something that has a probability associated happening. And then you can pick, moonshots. That's something out there that's not necessarily on the minds of a whole host of folks now, but you bring it up. I mean, I think a lot of HR managers would be, totally out of their comfort zone if you said, we're going to reward you based on your ideas and your intellectual capital, that segment of the workforce versus, a 40-hour work week and getting paid X amount per hour.
So step one is to do an assessment, an environmental scan, look at the influences. 2, try to think about where things are going, either how you see them unfolding, or 2, how you would like to see them unfold.
Exactly, Jerome. Exactly. Well stated. And the other
but let me give you a current example of January 6th here in Washington, D.C. So we had 2 visions of America on display there.
Right.
So I could write a scenario which focused on a society that becomes increasingly antagonistic, or I could write a scenario one where the society comes to some kind of truth and reconciliation and creates something new and better and improved.
Exactly. By the way, there was a while ago, and I think I still have it, and this is specific to the District of Columbia, is that there was an issue, a magazine section insert a couple of years ago, and it said Washington, D.C., 2025. That was the title of it on the outside.
Yeah, I had proposed for one of our local history conferences to look at all the studies of Washington, D.C. 2020, which we were doing 20 years ago,
Right.
and see which of those actually had unfolded. I think I have one in my file somewhere where I wrote about what Washington would be like in 2020. I'll have to see if I can find it and
That'd be kind of
dust it
cool.
up.
Look, go back and look.
But the one thing I do remember is because the question is always, when will the district get home rule?
Exactly.
And I had a political crisis theory of home rule, in that we have to continue to struggle for home rule, but ultimately every change in governance in the District of Columbia changed because of a political crisis that was unresolved.
Never let a crisis go by.
And so I think we're at that moment that we've got the crisis that for all the work that people have been doing since 1790 to push for statehood, we now have the crisis, that the opportunity to push it forward. And that's my theory of one of the things that will come out of this crisis is DC will have statehood.
Good.
So, but that's a prediction. That's not a scenario. So I would have to write the scenario. I'll have to go back and write the scenario. It's not June 30th, 2025, but it's June 30th, 2021. The District of Columbia,
Whatever it is, okay?
and the District of Columbia has statehood.
2021?
2021. Yes, you heard me.
Okay.
Okay. The other thing, getting back to mechanics about this, the hardest part is starting. You know, whether you're on paper or on your laptop or whatever else, you know, you put the date in, put your name of your protagonist, and try to get through your first paragraph. The other thing I would like you to do is when you have a concept that you're trying to illustrate, and you can use names to do it. In other words, you can have men, women, different races, whatever else. And then the point that you put in there in an end note, you know, you just kind of throw a little superscript up there and, you know, go to the end note section and you say diversity in the workforce. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Or if somebody's doing something at 11 o'clock at night, you know, it's 24/7, a 24/7 work life, personal life unbalance. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So we could have positive futures and we could have negative
Oh, of course.
futures, or we could have dystopias as well as utopias.
Exactly.
So we could have utopias and dystopias.
Right.
Let's agree to work on utopias.
Yeah.
Beg pardon?
I'm
Let's
a
agree to
positive
work
guy,
on
and I like to appeal to better angels, but that's okay.
Are you talking to me, Sharon?
You're the one who brought up dystopias.
I
If the shoe fits.
What is it? I've got a book over there on the bookshelf right over, the other way, that way. And it's about Bill Joy and Ray Kurzweil talking about technology being used for good and technology being used for evil.
Right.
And they had a big debate on it. And it was the notion of the singularity when machine intelligence exceeds human intelligence. And then, you know, what can you do with it? And then it was a very good book and a very good debate back and forth. So, and that book is probably 15 years old now.
So we start with our frustrations, we start with our anguishes, we start with our hopes, we start with our dreams, and we get a viewpoint, and then we begin to think about where we would. So here we are today.
Right.
Where would we like to be in the future?
Well, where would we like to be in the future, and then you know, assess some of those wishes, dreams, dystopias, or whatever else against macro level trends that you have identified. That's why you looked at a couple of articles. And then what we're going to do, getting back to mechanics, Jerome, when we finally get back together, each of you are going to read your scenario out loud to the rest of us.
Okay.
Why do we do that? It creates a pucker factor. Nobody wants to look stupid in front of their colleagues. Okay. So that means, I mean, I'm just being really frank right up front. And I used to do it with students and they go, oh no, I got to read this thing. I mean, I've done it with, you know, 3-star Egyptian generals. I've done it with a whole bunch of retired 3 stars and the senior intelligence types. And they kind of went into it and they give you the jaundice eye. You know, they're really, but boy, oh boy, at the end of the process, they are just like, okay, we've got a whole bunch of things we have to identify. One group at the Department of Interior for their senior executive service training program that I did an offsite with, they liked it so much they wanted to create a little, you know, and they called it a video or a play, you know, about how this was going to act out.
So here's a scenario. We were talking about this briefly as we were talking off stage, so to speak, in the green room, our virtual green room. How you like that? I don't know what you call it. What color is a virtual green room? How's that for a riddle?
Virtually green.
Yep.
So we have this story that's unfolding that we can reach herd immunity with the vaccine.
Yeah.
That's the story that's out there.
Yeah.
There's a vision of a virus-free world, what it would be like to have where we could interact freely, where we don't have to worry about overloading our healthcare systems, people. But that's a vision. The trend suggests that we're headed there, but there could be some things that work against that.
Oh yeah. Exactly. So in other words, identifying some of those, and then the key thing is if you identify some of the mitigating factors that don't get you there, then how do you address them?
Okay.
And that's where the actual strategic plan comes into you know, what interventions in the organization would you have to make, either individually or collectively, to mitigate those things that are holding you back.
Right. So I was reading a Facebook post of a colleague about reflecting on the dream of Dr. Martin Luther King. He had a dream.
Oh, sure did.
68. Now, some people,
3.
yes, thank you, Sharon. Sharon likes pointing out where I'm wrong. She gets
I'm
joy.
just going to keep you on track. That's all.
I'm sorry.
I love it, Sharon. I love it.
In 63. So there's been a lot of talk yesterday, since it was King's, honoring King's on his birthday, about how people, first of all, interpreted the dream. So some people say that the dream has been disconnected from history. They wanted to sort of whitewash, not in a color sense of turning it white, but to make the dream more palatable. So they talk about peace and love, but others say that the real dream was to get rid of toward the end of King's life, he was threatened because he was calling out injustice, and he knew he felt in his bones that he was going to be killed.
Right.
And nobody, when we honor King, nobody talks about honoring the struggle. They talk about honoring the dream. And so a lot of people now are disillusioned. You know, do we have to dream again? So one of the things in terms of writing a scenario when we talk about that is what does it take to keep despair away? How do you get the antidote to despair when you look at things seem to being a mess?
Hope.
I mean, I think I just want to get back to mechanics, Jerome. I mean, you're really dealing with some lofty thoughts, and I applaud you for that.
Okay, all right.
Does everybody understand what's required of each of you? You're going to
Okay, well let's start with Lewis. Maybe Lewis can rephrase because I cut him off he was going to. So Lewis, can you rephrase what the assignment is and what the steps are?
I'm pretty sure I can.
Well, go for it.
Basically, you identify the current trends, then you identify what a scenario that you would like to see identified, and write a story according to having a specific character in mind. And from my point of view, I see it with the work relationship with a manager and a worker, but also integrating someone like a janitor and that person that has to physically be in place, as well as my teleworker who is at home as a working at home mom juggling both her 5-year-old and trying to build a team. So how do I integrate and make a palatable situation rewarding the work and the need for moving into a automated society?
And that's great. I mean, the one thing I would really encourage you is go back and there was an article in there. It was a 2-page article that Jerome was kind enough to send out. It was an article by a fellow by the name of Russ Tankersley, and it says, the 10 things that make a compelling scenario.
Okay.
So use that as a checklist. Use it as a checklist. And I mean, he says things in there that, technology is not necessarily the protagonist, okay? He also says in there, just like we said, like Jerome was saying, never let a crisis go by without trying to change something, okay? So in other words, if you create some tension, if you create, a crisis or whatever, and then, what interventions can kind of come and ameliorate it or mitigate risk, and then say from this, here are the opportunities that we can engage in here. So in other words, read Tankersley's, it's 2 pages. And then go back and look at those 2 scenarios that I included, and you can see how the storyline evolves. And then use the EndNote function to illustrate the key points. And when you have all of those, then we're going to have you read them in front of everybody, and then we're quiet, and then I'm going to assign different people. I'll say, Jerome, you look at all the organizational culture interventions, and you're writing down the whole list. And then James, you look at the business process change. Sharon, you look at the technology changes. And then what we'll have is we'll switch off roles. So at the end of the process, what do we have? Of all the scenarios out there, we have a listing of all the technology interventions, all the business process changes, and organizational culture change, or whatever else dimensions we want. So when we have that listing, we can go back to our scenarios. And I said, boy, I really like something that Sharon came up with, on that. So I'm going to beg, borrow, and steal from Sharon. That's called research, right? And then
that's called sampling. That's called sampling in the hip hop world. It's called sampling.
You say, so in other words, we're getting the, and I'm using this term euphemistically, we're getting the collective neuroses of the group to improve our own scenario. And we go back and we say, hey, I can rewrite these things. And then what I would do, if I were in your shoes, Jerome, is I'd collect them all after we kind of finish them and have them as products that can be shared.
Oh, well, that's the goal. Is they'll be published as blogs. So
yeah, we publish them and say this is a vision of the future. It is a futuristic story that people can identify with, and go from there.
So I like the concept of looking for the opportunity in the crisis,
right,
and using that as a way of framing it. And this ties to what Sharon was. She shouted out the word hope as an antidote to despair. So that's just another way of saying look for the opportunity in the crisis. So Sharon, can you quickly paraphrase what the assignment is, and then we'll ask James to do the same thing?
I'll read from my notes. The assignment is to develop a scenario that we will read to each other. Step 1 is to assess what's happening around us, the trends, the probabilities, the SWOT analysis, the whole thing like that.
Great.
Step 2 is ascertaining how things are unfolding. Wait a minute. How are things unfolding? Or how you would like, how are things working, evolving towards your vision?
Right.
Or not.
Or not. Well, if they're not evolving, that means if that's part of how they're evolving. They're going in a reverse direction.
Okay, Sharon. All right.
And step 3 is we will read our assignments, our scenarios to each other in the group. And my focus is going to be, and we're reviewing, is looking at the technology changes.
Wonderful.
Well, who's going to be your protagonist? Who's going to be the protagonist?
Jerome,
Yes.
it's an assignment for the next time we meet.
Good for you.
All right, James. What's your understanding of the
Well,
assignment?
I agree with everything Sharon said, because anything else is going to get a reaction. No, I'm only kidding. No, no, we're picking a point in the future, and we're looking at a situation, circumstance, a desire. In my case, looking in the future, and somebody, you're going to talk about what their story would be in terms of how it unfolded, and did it get them what they wanted, or were there things needed in order for them to ascertain what they were seeking?
Mm-hmm. So do you have a protagonist yet? Are you going to tell it from the standpoint of somebody needing this, or requesting the service? Or are you going to
somebody requesting the service?
Okay.
All right, let me give you an example. This is a use case scenario, so to speak, for something in the Department of Defense, and two other guys and I just wrote it. One's a vice admiral, and another guy's a heavy duty technologist. And it starts with, here we go. Ready? So, on the morning of Tuesday, May 11th, this year, at 6:41 a.m., Cynthia was having breakfast on her deck overlooking the Atlantic Ocean when she received an urgent text on her phone from Trevor, head of cybersecurity for Resilient. We may have a serious problem. Call me ASAP. Trevor rarely contacted her this early, so Cynthia decided to call him on her way to the office, in a car on the way to the office. Hi, Trevor, what's up? Trevor responded, you remember the digital supply chain disaster, FireEye? Cynthia responded, yes, of course. How can I forget it? Well, Trevor said, we thought we had it contained in January, but it looks like it was just the beginning. Our entire supply chain may be compromised. Cynthia responded, and they have a bunch of X's because it was an expletive, okay? Just what we need. Brief me in an hour at my office. And Cynthia, by the way, is the CEO, okay? And have your team get started on a presentation. We may have to call an emergency board meeting. And then it goes on. So that was day 1. And then it goes all the way through day 7. And this is a longer scenario, but it also illustrates all of the things that are actually going on. And it's a real heavy duty cyber attack. Okay.
Okay. So no sitting around the campfire and saying
no,
it was a dark and dreary night.
Dark and stormy night, right?
It's dark and stormy night. So
all I'm trying to do is you can kind of see the crisis there and the opportunity and what's happening.
So we had a comment from Mark Corbin, and we were talking about hope and despair, and he said we did just get rid of the nightmare. So thank you for that comment, Mark. Okay, so on the 5th of January, we had a general discussion of what scenario planning was and how you, Bob, became a futurist and how you became enamored by that. That was the focus of the discussion. This session was on how we do it, and you laid out some steps. Start with some crisis or some opportunity or some discordantness or some happiness or engagement, and then assess the situation.
Right.
Look at the trends, what will keep them going in a certain way, what will keep moving them in the opposite direction. Think about where we'd like to be, what our end state would be. So one way is to start here and go up to the end state. Another would say, I wish I was happy. On June 30th, 2025, I'm gonna be happy. Then the question becomes, what will it take between now and then to be happy? So that was just another way.
The other thing I will offer is that if you're writing these things and you want to pulse check, send me an email and we'll talk over the phone.
Okay. All right. Good.
This is not,
Okay.
this is, this is the, I mean, I don't know how
This
many
is not a
people are on that,
competition.
Jerome. I'll give you my phone number, okay? I don't
All right.
Right, Sharon, it's not a competition.
That's right.
I can give you
That
a
doesn't
number. All
mean
you
you
gotta
won't
do is
critique.
the hardest part is starting
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
the first paragraph.
yeah.
And then when you get through the first paragraph, you go, "Ooh, I think I got some other ideas." And I'm going to write them down. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at the Tankersley article. I'm going to look at the other couple that I wrote in there. And then you see, all right, I kind of get it now. Let me just go on with it. And you get better and better as you go. But if you want a pulse check, please give me a call.
Okay.
So for
You have
those,
my- maybe-
Now,
Go
Jerome,
ahead.
when is this due? When is this due?
well, we're supposed to be doing a week, but
In a week.
you can do it.
Sharon,
So it's due next week.
Sharon,
Yeah.
when would you like for it to be due?
That's fine, Jerome. Jerome, I just react anyway. Okay, so
All right, but we'll have to figure out a broadcast date. So,
Okay.
Okay.
but it won't broadcast on the 26th, not unless something happens. What I mean by something happens, if sometime guests can't make it, but we've had to miss.
we're reading them we're reciting them to the group.
Yes.
when we
Exactly.
when we do our next live.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
So
we
it
do
will,
our
it'll be
next slide, and-
it'll be sometime on or after the 26th of January.
Okay.
Okay.
But
Since
you
we're
want the
probably
two
looking
you
at
want the
people-
2-pager. You want the 2-pager within a week.
Right.
Yes.
The 2-page story. If you want to go a little longer, that's fine.
No,
The
that's
one I
fine.
was reading to you is longer. Okay.
All right.
But I mean, usually shorter is better.
Yeah.
Because people can remember things. If it gets too complicated with 15 different things going on once, cognitive psychology says you can remember 5 to 7 things, and as you get older, you're probably less than that. So, keeping it simple is a good thing.
Okay. Well, Bob, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob.
Sure.
Wait,
Sure.
I have a question for Bob.
Sure.
It's a general question. All of us are basically in the same cohort. Do you find that what is the impact of multi-generational groups doing this kind of exercise?
Well, I did it for a university one time, and I had a retired 4-star in there who was chief of staff of the Army, and I had some heavy-duty deans and academics in there. And then I did another, and they came up with some phenomenal stuff. But then I also ran this workshop on site with regular faculty members. And then I said, let's put students in the group. And they had to write them, and they had to come up with it. And then we got a whole different perspective. I mean, if in fact in education, a university education, if the student is the one who is on the receiving end of it, why not get some of those folks in there to write it?
Right.
And that's what I did. And I recommended to the president of the university to do that. And they said, sure, let's do it.
Great.
So they did. And it was a different perspective. And, they took things into consideration to make changes of how they're actually going to deliver its academic programs into the future. And the university was established in 1819. So long history.
All right. Very good. Well, thank you, Louis. So we're going to hear about the manager, the virtual worker, and the service, the janitor or support people. So that's going to be your scenario. I don't know who your protagonist is going to be there. And Sharon, you're going to do something about technology, and I'm not going to ask you no more questions. And then,
Very good.
And once again, you have my email, right?
Yeah.
Just send me an email, say, hey, let's chat. And then, you can read the thing to me, and I can, do a little brief critique or whatever else. And then say, hey, you're on the right track, or here's some other suggestions or whatever else. And then we make them better as we go.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone. This again, I'm Jerome Page, and you've been listening to Bob Nielsen, James Page, Lewis Hicks, and Sharon Pugh as part of the 1960s Project, where our voices from the 1960s, we're taking our voices from the 1960s and projecting them into the future with this particular exercise. So we will keep you posted when we have written our 2-page scenarios. We'll set up a website on our blog, on my website. We'll set up something that we can share the articles if you want to retrieve those. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to you tuning in and joining us on next week, where we're going to talk about Chinatown in 1968 in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.